Well, hello, everybody. We are absolutely beside ourselves thrilled to have Gregg Henriques with us. Y'all might remember that we did a series hounding Zach Stein and Jon Vervaeke and Gregg throughout their 6-part series toward a metapsychology of transformation as real, and really found really came to feel warmth and a kinship with these folks. We live in different universes, and we're going to try to bring those together. Epistemologically speaking, I would say different epistemological starting points, something like that. But the proximity of the best of the best in this space, and I would say these three are the best of the best in this space, along with many. Jonathan Rowson comes to mind in his conversation with Brendan Dempsey, and it was fantastic. And your conversation with Benita Roy and his conversation with Benita Roy, which we looked at that specifically. And so I see this as a continuation. And for once, we're going to actually engage with the people that we're hounding.
Give them a chance to defend themselves.
So give us a chance for a little humility. We're going to be put in our place. I fully expect.
I hope so. I want to learn something here that I didn't know before. I'm really looking forward to you challenging us, Gregg. If you also if looking for clarity, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen here, but that's what dialogue is about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Discovery together.
Yeah. It's not an ambush, I promise.
Hey, no, listen, I've seen several of your exchanges. It's delightful. I've enjoyed them when I've seen them. I love the richness that you're bringing to bear in this space. And I'd love the opportunity to come both to challenge and have disagreements. That's what I'm a lifelong academic. My dad's an academic. I live in the world of academic space. I do not expect people to be in the same epistemological world. I do believe that there's a lot more opportunity for aligning epistemological differences in a world space. I think that we're much more confused than we need to be. At least that's my journey as somebody who was confused and now is a little less so. A little less so. So it's great to be here in dialogue with you both.
Awesome.
Perhaps I'll fire away with a question that's might get us going. I was going to go with this is a surprise. I've changed my thinking. One of the things that I really enjoyed is in the metapsychology series that you talked about is the use of the Cambrian explosion. It's the foundation, the mystery of the Cambrian explosion, because it is this huge mystery that really, once you begin to come to grips with it, really has to change your convictions about materialist suppositions, assumptions. Tell us a little bit about why it's so important in your work and your theory there, Gregg.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's a wonderful entry point. And we'll have to come back to the word materialist because I don't know if I fit in that category or not, depending on which.
No, I'm not you. No. Okay. Traditionally,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Cambrian explosion. Just so people are aware, about 530 million years ago, we see within at least geologically speaking, short period of time, there's a pretty rapid transition in the animal kingdom, where we have before it what would probably be body plans similar to planaria worms. That means you get some bilateral, there is a brain, you're moving around like a worm. And then within about 5 to 10 million years, you get essentially lobsters, okay, the equivalent of lobsters. And that is a remarkable period. That's very important in the unified theory of knowledge. The UTOK's tree of knowledge system identifies this as the explosion of minded animals, okay? Animals that have the property of mindedness. It's not like, oh, they have minds. It's like they're minded. And what does that mean? It means a fully developed sensory motor loop that has a brain as a computational control center, and it's modeling the agent-arena relation, and it has a complex active body that can get up in what Michael Levin calls 3D behavioral space and move that thing around. The best idea as to why this explodes probably is that there's a prey-predation relation that emerges. So you get animals that are eating plants, And then all of a sudden, animals can start eating each other. And when you get animals eating each other, now you have an entirely different complex adaptive dynamic of trying to navigate this space. And so you get armaments, offensive armaments and defensive armaments. And now all of a sudden you get this space really being populated in very different ways. And for me, the functional awareness and responsivity of animals in the sensory motor loop and all of the things that they can do when they get up and move around warrants the term mind or mindedness. And animals are minded in the same way that cells are alive. It's not like the life inside the cell. No, it's the complex adaptive functional awareness and responsivity of a cell as a complex adaptive system. That's what we call it, life. And that's very different than the behaviors of a water molecule. Well, the complex adaptive behaviors of a crab are very different than a single cell. And it is the sensory motor loop, the centralized control system of the brain in a complex active body that gives rise to a different kind of behavior in the world, what I call mental behavior or minded behavior. And that's a very, very important thing in the tree of knowledge. That's actually where you get sort of the science of mind-brain behavior, which I call basic psychology. The psychology should not be thought of as its base as about humans. Psychology fundamentally should be the science of mind, which is a third dimension of complexity. It studies minded behavior. And then you get human psychology, which is about human mindedness, which is quite different than that of houseflies. But nonetheless, it is part of the mindedness. So one of my big concerns is, what is psychology? What are mental processes and behaviors? Well, one is minded behaviors, sensory motor looping in animals. And then we're going to see that stack complexify. My syncing up with Jon Vervaeke allows me to see that stack complexify with a lot more richness across a recursive relevance realization process. And then ultimately, we're going to place a propositional language system on top of that. And we're going to get human mindedness and the evolution of the culture person plane of existence. But the point of it is that we should be aware of the culture or the Cambrian explosion, and it blows out into a new complex adaptive design space, not unlike life itself blowing out of matter, probably on planet Earth, but however it was seeded.
And so from the perspective Jeff and I are coming from, someone like Goethe is going to turn around, it's like with his poetic language, and say, it's like nature has created, it's like us, so that it can know itself. Nature herself can know herself. So there's a telos going on there. Now, this idea of teleology is antithetical to modern scientific thinking, certainly materialistic thinking. How does that fit in with?
So to me, then, when we say, okay, we can now see this and zoom out, okay, and then we can see the arc of complexification and recursivity of awakening of awareness. That's what I would say the tree of knowledge shows you. Okay. So we can then see that. In other words, the tree of knowledge, that's the upside down cones that go from material objects into living organisms, and then the explosion of minded animals, and then culture as systems of justification. They evolve. And then ultimately you get the science now coming back and mapping this process. Okay. And then you take a zoom out shot. And by the way, it looks like the exact opposite of entropy. So if you're like, oh, the universe is always increasing in entropy, that's a kind of confusing statement. I had you talking with Howard Bloom, and he makes this point. He goes a little off base, I think, in some of his critiques of what entropy is. But he's like, oh my God, the universe is stacking, it's complexification, and it's the exact opposite of entropy, and nobody knows what entropy is. And he flies off. And it's sort of like, okay, there's a lot of truth. I mean, you can get into a lot of academic refined analysis here and make it complicated. But the bottom line is, holy shit, look at all that complexification. Okay. Then to me, to then say, well, that's what the universe is doing. We can describe that process, I think. And I've hooked up and synced up with Bobby Azarine. I don't know if you've seen any of his work on the romance of reality. And basically the entire universe as a learning system. And this variation selection is a learning system, and it's increasing areas of, and that's what the universe is doing. He actually pushes that argument further than I would in terms of like, I love it as a mythos. So a mythos is like, I want to relate to the world this way. And maybe it's true. And I can relate to it in a particular kind of way that is true. scientific evidence that that is the right way to describe it, and we can try to reduce and attack that from a wide variety of different angles, and this is what we're left with because there's no real alternative explanation, that's a little strong for me. So what I would say is the logos of our history is, in fact, this complexification. The universe is, at least in our trail, okay, this line. As I told Howard Bloom, keep in mind, if when we take a big picture view, most of the universe is just hydrogen, helium, and empty space. So it's not like we woke up. But in terms of at least what we know, it's like there's a lot of emptiness and chaos and entropy and low-level operations out there. We're a very unique spot. So to say the universe is always trying to wake up, that's hard. You can depend on which angle you take. But fundamentally, I love that story. I do believe that there is a line of dissipative structures that are increasing their complexification. I believe we're a part of that line. I think we are little examples of the universe waking up. I think that's empirically, you can just state that. I'm much more
exactly.
there.
Every one of us is an example.
So descriptively, now is that the cause because the universe wants to wake up and there's some sort of greater force? The mythos of that gets right in. I was talking to you before this, my concept of God. I love to, I can back into that and have a story of that. My science side and science training says, okay, but now you're starting to you're adding flavor to that in a way that is unnecessary from a descriptive explanatory place, potentially, or at least quite raises all sorts of questions.
Can I ask you a question then based on that? I would say that just to frame the question, that the worldview that Angus and I share, and people who are students of the work of Rudolf Steiner would say, is that it all starts with, everything starts with thinking, epistemologically speaking. And I was going to ask the question about Zach and Mark's human, what is it?
Cosmoerotic humanism.
Cosmoerotic humanism. And it seems very close to our perspective.
Okay.
How do you relate that, the idea? I think that their terminology is something like allurement, that there's something at the root of existence, universal existence, that is, forget about the vastness of space, even the vastness of time, or the infinitude of time. Right now, we are working in ways that are self-transformative. We're affecting evolution on a moment-to-moment basis, I would suggest, because we are transforming our subjective self. And this goes to the I-me conversation that you all had in part 3 of the elusive I. And I'm wondering how you see this idea, or is it too much conjecture to speak about this idea that what Mark and Zach are working on as this allurement, and what Steiner would say basically, and I'm putting words in his mouth because it nowhere says this, but I think it's something we think we've won in our work together, is that at the foundation of existence is thinking, and human thinking is a version of that creates the subjective aspect as a transparent aspect that allows us to participate in a way that puts us in the world, in a way that allows us to know from a universal perspective, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be close to that. There'll definitely be some tweaking. I would really want to be this concept of thinking, concept of mind at the base, concept of all of that. We're going to have to really, we're going to get a kind of bore down into that and say, well, what do we actually really mean about that? Okay. I will say this. So at a base level, for us to have intelligibility, we need epistemology and ontology. So at the higher level of philosophy, there's just no ontic reality independent of us humans knowing about it and just discover, and then that is the reality of everything. So I am an onto-epistemologist when it comes to knowledge claims. So that's in a general comment. I will say that I spent 3 days with Zach and Mark and their conference on cosmoerotic humanism. I came away with a lot of appreciation for sort of the core grounding. They, at one point, the allurement aspect was grounded maybe even for me at least, the way they framed it, and I think they framed it, I think I'm doing justice, is we're situated. You can make an ontological claim that essentially the universe is situated in value. Okay, so one way to think about value then is like approach, avoid, attract, move toward, move away, and they're the layers of value, and whether that value then, how we relate to that value and how we see a continuity of cross value, is the positive and negative charges coming together, in a cosmoerotic, sense, and when they're going to pull that kind of felt sense of being throughout the ontological structure of the universe. And to me, there are ways in which that angle and aspectualization, to use a Jon Vervaeke term, has a lot of power and a lot of depth. I will say at other times during the Cosmoerotic Humanistic Conference, and I certainly told Zach that and I communicated with Mark, there was way too much imputation of the human onto that. So in terms of like, I can pull a line, it's like with panpsychism, I would experience the same kind of problem. It's like, okay, there is this sense. So my terminology for the base of the universe is the energy information implicate order. Okay, I'm going to take a David Bohm term. I'm going to collapse the universe at its ultimate substantial entity. Is sort of, if you vacuum out all space and time and differentiation, you get this singular substantial energy, pure, whatever, and that thing is going to then differentiate. And then it's the differentiation within that thing that ultimately is going to be the potential. Ultimately is going to be the potential for essentially all epistemic process. Epistemic process is going to pull off of the differences that make a difference embedded in that. So there's this hint of epistemic thinking embedded in the original differentiation for me. And for me, what this does is it basically says, oh, thinking and being sort of go all the way down at one level. Okay. And that's what, if I hear it that way, I'm like, oh, thinking and we're this sort of stack of refined epistemic process across a stack of information processing on information processing. And we have our own particular differentiated epistemic process based on our history. And yet at the same time, every being is doing that. And we share that being across a wide variety of different domains. There is a continuity and a way in which I could align with that view. And then I would want to say, obviously, rocks are not thinking like people are thinking, right? And so you have an immediate differentiation I want to make in terms of all the stuff that we think of when we say I'm thinking is very different than what I would say a rock is thinking. So those are the kinds of things that I would.
I'm going to try and use the same words as you were using, Greg, and sort of like identify where okay. I see the differences are. So this differentiated energy order that you talk about, it's like in our context, that is the given, and so this it's sort of like is identical from that perspective. However, that the fact the ontology of that, we can know nothing about it until we start thinking about it. So it might have all this implicit order, or if you want to use like Aristotelian forms or Platonic forms like going on there, or archetypes from Jung, that might all be true. But until thinking actually starts contemplating it, we cannot know anything about like the ontology. And that for us is like a critical step. So like, yes, epistemology and ontology are tied. So like implicitly, there's like they're a union. But you talked about an onto-epistemology, whereas, and in that, I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly, but there's a primacy on ontology, whereas from our perspective, it has to, because of the role that thinking serves, it's like in relationship to knowledge, it has to be an ontological reality. And that's actually really like absolutely key for us. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great conversation. So this would be, I love that. And certainly my general response was, well, there's the iterative dynamic relation between the two. That's what I wouldn't necessarily, I'd be like, Because as you build your ontology, then the processes by which you are then claiming your epistemology, okay, are then iteratively impacted. All right, let me and I'll explain this in terms of my own history, okay? Because one of the things that starts the journey that's going to become UTOK is exactly this kind of dynamic. All right, and that gets into in 1996. I developed the justification idea. Okay, so the justification idea is basically this: when you go from symbolic broken terminology like their antelope, okay, and then you get a tipping point where you get a symbolic syntactical meaning making claim, what John calls the propositional knowledge system. When there's a tipping point in there, and then you make positive meaning claims. And my insight was that those positive meaning proposition claims create a whole set of generative potentials and adaptive problems, what I call the justification problem. Okay. Yeah. Which basically is, as you drop a proposition claim into the world, you can then challenge it with questions: who, what, why, when, where, which open up negative space dynamics. Okay. And then all of a sudden you have the problem of justification, which is what is justifiable. Okay, which is how do we build propositional networks that legitimize, with recursive relevance realization, use John's term, what it is that we ought to do, both myself and then you collectively, and ultimately the culture, person, plane of existence is then seen as this dynamic iterative process of building systems of justification that coordinate persons. Okay, so I'm a scientist, okay, at this stage in the game. I still am, but I'm like a regular scientist, a standard behavioral scientist. And then I'm like starting the process by which I have to like do experiments on this. So if you have an idea in science, then you have to make predictions, and then those predictions need to test shit. And then you get the data back and you decide whether you can falsify it. And then you can then say, hey, that's a justified idea. Yeah. Well, as I started to build hypotheses, you know what I realized? I was engaged in the process of justification itself. Okay. So then I realized I'm inside the epistemology of justification at a scientific level, when actually I'd stepped out and realized ontologically we're justifying beings. Okay. Yeah. So like I got horizontal or vertical or whatever on this epistemology ontology dynamic. Okay. So inside this whole idea of justification is this very weird and dynamic relation between both the epistemological problems. I mean, Plato calls the theory of knowledge justified true belief, which is you're going to build beliefs, you're going to see what truth is, you're going to develop a justified relation. Freud, on the other hand, by the way, argues the entire self-conscious mind is a justifying, really means by defensive rationalizing. Justification is an entire dimension that I get to see between Freud and Plato, and pull that out. And now I get to look at humans as justifying. Now, of course, I have to have epistemological knowledge that pulls that out. And all I'm saying is that for me, at least historically, the relation between ontology and epistemology is dynamic, is fascinating. And I'm certainly fine with saying, well, if you're going to make any intelligible knowledge claims, that means you are immediately pulling some sort of epistemic frame to begin with. So you have to create an epistemic frame to create intelligibility. All I would say then, as soon as you start to see stuff, this can feed back on your epistemic frame, obviously. And all of a sudden, your epistemic frame is in dynamic relation. I now ontologically know that I'm a justifying ape, when before I was just trying to see who I was in the world. Now the ontology reveals itself back to me, and that shifts and holds my epistemology. So UTOK argues it's a coherent ontological epistemological, or I'd be fine with epistemological ontological philosophy.
Oh, that's good. Can I just, for clarification a little bit, two things. One is I would say I would consider myself an epistophenomenological ontology.
Okay.
Wanker.
You can't say that in English.
I think I got you.
Yeah. I mean, those are 800 words, but I'm from Flint, Michigan, and I was raised on.
Hey, I'm here. Yeah, so I'm with you.
And big block 442s, you know. So, the point is that without so there's a couple things there. One is you can't say anything about an ontology if you don't have it, if you're not working out of an epistemology. And for us, I would say the epistemology is always central. It's not something you establish as a body of knowledge and then you set aside. It's a process, it's a phenomenological process that reveals new levels of reality, but also creates new levels of reality. And in that sense, we're participatory in the universal process.
Lovely.
Okay, so and then I would say that I don't have a personal objection to being called an ape who thinks or has justification systems, but it's plausible to see the what Zach says is we're everywhere in the universe. We've been everywhere in the universe, and we've always been there, so to speak. That there's something of an agentic or entic nature that is inherently permanent. Like inherently permanent's not the right word, but eternal. These, there's no way to get around using religious language at a certain point.
Okay.
And so I would just lay that out there as a side by side, because I would suggest that it's more for us. My understanding, I'll just speak for myself, that the evolutionary process has been one of shedding, has been one of distillation from a non-embodied phenomenological reality, or embodied in different bodies, ontologically speaking, that are of different realms. So for us, there's dimensionally different ontological realms that one can pop into and move around, and they're furnitured and lawful in their own way. And I also want to get there's a side by side. I also want to say, I want to ask the question, what do you mean by justification? And why is that so important, right? Because the colloquial use of justification is the Freudian use, which is a terrible infection in our. I argue this is one of the ways in which psychology took up Catholic guilt or something strange like that, right? This sort of stained self kind of thing. And so I really would like to hear. And is there a point at which we transcend justification? Or the need for justification, or is it just part of our psychoneurological structure?
So I argue basically that you have a propositional knowledge system in your head. Okay, propositional knowledge system. Basically, in other words, just like you have a vision system, you have a language acquisition device that's very good at tagging nouns, verbs, adjectives, and symbolically, syntactically placing them in a propositionally networked, meaningful order. And we do that way better than any other animal. And there's a lot of good evidence that other animals communicate, other animals quote unquote talk, but they don't have a symbolic, syntactical, propositional network system. That's what we have. What the justification idea is that what is the structural and functional organization of your propositional, like what is again, I'll use Jon Vervaeke's term. What is that ties it together through recursive relevance realization? Well, it's the problem of justification, which is legitimizing is an ought. So to gain equilibrium, you have a network of propositions that is attempting to gain equilibrium through a network of legitimizing is an ought. And you do that for your ego, which is your own self in relationship to the rest of your primate phenomenology, your felt sense of being in the world, and like how you're going to sort of explain what it is that you see. And then you do that collectively with other people in the world that basically says, hey, okay, this is what's going on. Okay. And then you build, and there are all sorts of different kinds of justificatory processes. Some of them are Freudian rationalization processes. Some of them are analytic philosophy processes. And for me, this is why I say Plato on the one hand. Remember, your epistemology, formal epistemology, is justified true belief. In other words, the most refined ways in which we analyze claims can be described in terms of justification, meaning Einstein is justified in his theory of relativity because of the mathematics and the data that he generates. And now we can say E equals mc squared, and there's a limit on the speed of light, and there's a position of observers across accelerating frames of reference, etc. Okay, so that then all becomes, those are analytic justifications. Okay, versus, hey, I'm gonna slap you because you deserve it kind of justification at a social constructed kind of known, but they're both legitimizing propositional networks. So the term justification speaks to the structural, functional organization of your propositional knowing system. That's what it refers to. And it gives us a framework for organizing propositional knowledge and seeing the structural functional organization of propositional knowledge in a different light. It places it in the cosmic evolutionary history because the idea that I had, which really has not been, there are a couple of people that have kicked it around, but I got to see it clearer than anyone had seen it prior as to why ontologically the evolution of our mentation would give rise to this issue, and then what the consequences of it were, and how it played not the only role, but a very central role in why we became a very different kind of animal.
So you've thanks for unpacking that with justification, and because you sort of brought in a concrete piece of evidence, Einstein's theory of relativity, we can play with that a little bit, because when you begin to unpack that, you can begin to ask yourself the question: these justifications, are they real justifications? So just take your statement about the speed of light, so like the max velocity in the universe. So you've got that as a core concept in there, it's being justified through the thinking process that's alive in there, and it's stated as something which is all encompassing for the universe. Fair enough so far?
Right. Well, that's an epistemological claim about the nature of ontology. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So you're justifying. However, so it's put out there as a truth. It's fully justified. It's like in the mind of science, and yet you've got entanglement going on, and other evidence there that says, no. This notion of that the speed of light is like the max speed in the universe. There's something fundamentally wrong with that concept, because we've got phenomena going on that break that rule. And the relationship. I don't want to get into the science, the details of the science there. It's what's interesting in the context of this conversation is, when is justification wrong, and when are we ignorant about that? So we think we're making a correctly justified claim, but it's actually in reality specious. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Absolutely. So now we get in. This is a great, wonderful, beautiful question. And here's where I sort of bottom out, and this is where I have my ontology epistemological balance, and why I'm a little bit more of a realist than some people, but I'm certainly not like, ontic realism, we've discovered it and we know what it is, and regardless if we live, this is the truth regardless of our human minds. It's like, I'm not like that at all. I'm also not like, God only knows, we just make shit up, and science is just it's like polite behavior in a Victorian society, use Alan Sokal's critique, and it's like we just we just decide to put the fork on that. We decided that there were hydrogen atoms. That is not okay. No. And that brings me to, so I am a transcendent realist when it comes to sort of the atomic structure of the matter dimension of existence, and I'll unpack that for you. Okay. A transcendent realist so what do I believe? I believe that the description of matter at the hydrogen helium level, i.e. that most of the universe is made up of hydrogen and helium atoms, is a transcendent realist claim. I mean by that, and that is, if there were other aliens and they dissected the universe in a propositional knowledge way that was translatable and developed a description of how the universe would work, we would quickly be able to see that they saw hydrogen and helium atoms also.
This is beautiful. What you're saying here is, because what you're saying is, the way I'm understanding it is, that's like, we can talk about realities that we can't directly perceive, but we can recognize an inherent logic in them. Yep. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're saying. And I'm actually adding a claim to that, which is actually I got from Roy Bhaskar, called the TINA principle. The TINA principle stands for there is no alternative.
The Maggie Thatcher.
I mean, so the there is no alternative. Like, we have gotten enough knowledge about the basic structure of the matter dimension of existence that we can make claims that I think transcend our human knowing. And then you have a thought experiment that says, well, if we hooked up with aliens, what would they say? If aliens are tapped into, say, dark energy, dark matter, and there's actually a whole nother set of forces that we somehow overlook, and they explain the universe, and they're like, actually, what you guys call that's just not even necessary. Here's the foundation and all of this. And then I'm like, oh, I guess I'm much more Kant, and the epistemological ground of human categories is imposing a structure on reality that is stronger than I would have guessed. So my prediction is the aliens would see the propositional aliens are going to see helium and hydrogen in the universe, and the correspondence between these two very different epistemological systems will point to a structure, at least there, in a way that has such remarkable correspondence. You got radically different epistemological histories arriving at an ontological continuity that then says, yeah, the epistemology is now tied to the ontology in a particular way.
So those same aliens, what would they say about the soul and the spirit?
Well, okay. So that's where I'm like, I am not like all of our knowledge coming off of life. I is epistemologically human.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in other words,
I'm talking about the reality. So these aliens, they would identify helium and hydrogen, which we would assume to be correctly. Yeah. But would they also? So would some of them sort of like see a soul and other ones not, a little bit like it is here on Earth? Also, like, would all of them? It's because you have to have a conceptual framework before you can actually see something. If I look out onto the world and haven't created that conceptual framework, it just passes me by. It's not there, even if it is there. Just like hydrogen atoms weren't there before. They became a creation of the human mind. So let me see if
I'm not sure if I got exactly what you're saying, so maybe I misreferenced. Obviously, they will have an epistemological system. Okay? Yeah. So they'll have a knowing system. That's what I said. And it has to even be a knowing system that somehow aligns with propositional knowledge, because there'll be other knowing systems, ways of being in the world that may have all sorts of intelligence that don't turn into anything that's translatable into proposition. So I have to say, not only do they have ways of knowing, they need to have the shared propositional kind of knowing, because there's other ways of knowing that wouldn't even, they have huge amounts of intelligence that we couldn't even map, but they never really ask the question in the same way that we're asking it. So they have to ask the question. That's the only way we correspond. Now, when you say, would they say we would have souls and spirits? Did I hear you correctly?
So are they also an essence of the universe, just like
they would be an essence, and then it'd be an essence, and then they would have to have some sort of evolved epistemological structure, I would presume, at some level.
Epistemological structure. I suppose the reason I framed it like I did is, if we don't have a concept of a certain phenomena, it's like in the world, it will pass us by. It is invisible to us. It's there, but it's invisible to our consciousness. Mm-hmm. So when Jeff and I are talking, so the importance is, so one of the areas of extreme importance is to have this clarity around the idea that, so like, it is only once I, as a thinking being, have developed concepts within myself as an individual, that I then become capable of recognizing that same, let's call it archetypal form, it's like for the sake of this conversation, that is also out there in the universe. And it's like, so that's the conceptual truth that I created myself. I find it reflected out in the universe, out in life there. What these aliens, so I was like trying to build on your metaphor there, that how are they going to, when they hear human beings talking about soul and spirit, what are they going to be saying about that? Are they going to be saying there's no evidence for it, or are they going to say, human beings have souls, and they're like these immortal souls in the sense that's like Platon talks about it in Phaedo, and when it comes to spirit, are they going to talk about spirit in the same way that Rudolf Steiner talks about spirit? What do you think they would be saying there? I
have no idea on what they'd be saying there. All I'm saying, saying, no idea.
But do you understand why I'm asking the question?
Sort of. I mean, what I'm saying is that to the extent that I have any grounding in, the most ontologically grounded place that I get is in the hydrogen helium atomic structure. I have the any epistemological claims about soul and spirit, I mean, what I would immediately say is we can't agree on what those terms mean at the level of the ambiguity about all of that stuff is such. So there's no consensus that humans have achieved that this is an ontological reality. So that's where it's a little confusing. There may be, and so to me, I would say, well, whatever, if they're higher order and they're clearly much greater than us, then they come in and they'll tell us whatever their ontological truth is. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess so, then now we're enlightened or whatever. So I guess I would have to say, well, then, yeah, I mean, if I'm placing them on a higher order epistemological pedestal, then they could come in and see shit that we have no clue about. And then they teach us. And then we would be like, oh, and then that asks me like, well, what is the nature of soul and spirit in terms of, I can give you my little version of reality on that. But I'm trying that to me is all part of the local, I place the unified theory of knowledge. I'm very clear about this. I try to be. It's a 21st century human construction.
Yeah.
Okay. It's in other words, I'm situated myself in a socio-historical justificatory narrative. I'm embedded in a massive epistemological, socially constructed reality. I care about the problem of psychology because a bunch of humans built science and they tried to jam mind in it and they had all sorts of justification problems. And I came along and was like, oh, I see what each of you guys are saying. I see why you were confused and I can fix that. And as I fix that in this little endo-natural view of the world, I gain a lot of clarity that didn't happen before and I advance my understanding. That's what I'm saying. Now, an alien comes along that has so much. Greg, you're an idiot.
Or let's call him Aurobindo instead of an alien. Because
Okay.
Aurobindo, I mean, he's got that. He's still like pointing in that direction, isn't he?
Well, a lot of people point in that direction, but I'm not convinced that of what it is. They're people talking. Okay, they're not demonstrating to me the kind of mastery of the universe that is like, oh, if Aurobindo says it, then it's totally true. That's not where I am in relation.
No, it's not. It's based on self-experience or understanding. I'm not going to inherit somebody else's belief system. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm certainly interested and open to it, but they're talking apes too. As far as I'm concerned. So we're all then sort of situated in this until and then you sort of like see, well, what is the claim? And like I said, as I told you when we came onto this call, I would argue that I was restricted and skeptical. I mean, I've always been sort of open, but I'm going to adopt a particular restriction and skepticism. As my system has evolved, I've gotten much cleaner and clearer on what is plausible, what frames of reference, and a lot of shit I was saying was not plausible is now much more plausible to me, for sure. And I'm much more like, oh, I think there's a real line of coherence that I can now relate to with what Aurobindo is saying.
Jeff, do you want to come in, or shall I build off that?
Just that there's I would think that there's a long line of people who have practiced what are called interior sciences, and psychology is just is nested in that long line. It's also nested in science, which is also nested in that long line of say pioneering at the level of expanding levels of consciousness. Now you could argue that we as complexifying creatures, we're on the sort of where we are part of the expansion of consciousness as a evolutionary process from a metaphysically real standpoint, or a transcendental realist standpoint. Or you could also start with your own process. And I would add to the 8-cylinder words to suggest that I'm seeing myself as an ontogeneticist in the I would say in the what's his name, the psychologist, the developmental Piaget, in the sense that Piaget might mean genetic, right? So we enter us into creation. Say we're the aliens.
Okay.
Enter us into creation, and we find ourselves to be beings who are creating, right? And so we have the process of creation, I would argue, microcosmically in our process, and we can share that. And that is, I would say, a scientific methodology that's available that doesn't start with the presumptions of material causative factors. Because when I hear you saying that you're not a materialist, I hear materialism, because I hear that the causative origination of these factors are basically a sort of chemism and mechanics of motion, similar to the way Hegel establishes his starting point. Am I wrong there, or?
Well, I mean, I have a historical arc of complexification in a big history sort of way in terms of causation that builds upon itself. I mean, I do subscribe to the fact that if we roll the tape backwards, we suck human consciousness out and are left with animal mindedness, and then we go back to the Cambrian explosion and we suck animal mindedness out and we have living organisms. Then we can suck living organisms out, and then 4 billion years ago you have and time has a lot to do with cause and effect. And I'm not a reductionist in the sense that, for me, this conversation is taking place at the culture person plane of existence. It's not taking, and you can never reduce this conversation to chemicals. That's silly, or gravity. It's actually operating at the level of justification, and the justification are causal in relation. But these things emerge out of more simple elements over a big history time frame. So that would be my ontological claim. So 4 billion years ago, you basically have chemistry, and so that's engaged in whatever causal structure that's. So is that where are you coming from?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was going to answer Gregg's question. Well, it's a mystery for me. So to start off with, that's what I would say, is that that life is a mystery. That we have gained some knowledge that say the Big Bang is completely unraveling now. Right.
I wouldn't say that, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's say it's being called into question as a foundational moment, and it's plausible that it's not the explanation of the genesis of life, say, and that's an important point.
Well, it's a genesis of the universe, of the material universe, not so much. Big Bang's not a theory of life. The Big Bang is theory of the universe.
Yes, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not making this point to argue. I'm only making the point to clarify.
Yeah, no, we're trying to get clear about
exactly. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. It is inert matter that produced the dynamics that followed is inert matter coming to life in some way, and that's through motion and so-called chemistry. Chemistry is a little bit formal of a word, and Hegel uses the term chemism, and I think that's a proper term if you're making a metaphysical claim of origin, something like that.
There's a dynamic activity of molecular behavior, and out of that dynamic activity of molecular behavior, there is a to be determined, although I think we have lots of clues about variation, selection, retention, and other kinds of processes that ratchet up complexification. And you then make stage-wise progression towards the development of cells.
Can I ask a clarifying question there, building on what you were saying there, Jeff? I think was one of perhaps this is one of the areas of difference, because I'm also hearing the materialism, and I'm not sure whether it's justified yet, but perhaps this question will help clarify. Consciousness, is that dependent on matter? Can consciousness? Okay, so from our perspective, you might not agree with it. You are a materialist because you're saying that consciousness is an emergent property of materialism, and this is where we are. Yeah, we are. In that sense, we're polar opposites. So it's good to have established that.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good clarification. So this is lovely because, as I said, we're in different universes. We're not in different universes, but we're starting at different places. And what I see right now happening with the integral movement and the metamodern movement, and Zach's notion of a time between worlds, is this opportunity like no other opportunity that I've known in my lifetime, and that I see in history. Now they were kairotic moments, say, to borrow Jon's phrase. No question about it. But the degree of self-awareness is so key to us as I would say, epistophenomenological ontologists or anthroposophists. It's so key because there's something coming available in our psychospiritual processes that unveils the reality that we are not even yet in our physical bodies fully, and that this process can tell us something about the spiritual nature of thinking, can tell us something about the soul process that is in permeable relationship with both the spirit and the physiological framework that we have, known as life processes. And I don't know if life processes are hyper objects based on this, what I was just listening to in your guys' conversation, but that we also, with Michael Levin, and he would agree with you as relates to that it starts out with chemistry, is that we are affecting even the cellular aspect more, and I would suggest increasingly, and that is something like an evolution of consciousness, and that consciousness is not dependent on the physicality, and that we can discover this in our own processes as a thinking person who's creating a self that generates concepts that then uses cognition to unify the world in ways in which we're yet separate from.
Okay, I don't disagree with that.
And
we got work to do to get on clear, because I'm not here's what I'm not. I'm not a reductive mechanical materialist, so I'm definitely not that. And this conversation will change my cells, right? So, and creatively so. In fact, Jon and I are arguing for strong transcendence. Collectively, we can come together and get epistemic concepts that are transformative for our collective awakening, and maybe wake up to the whole purpose of the universe together. I mean, that's totally within the domain. So are you guys one worlders? I mean, is there at the level of substance? I mean, are you guys one worlders or dualists at the level of substance? Is there more than one core substance in the world?
Both.
Well, okay, so dual, non. Okay, well,
I would say
union in duality. So can I come back to that question, because I wanted to build further on what Jeff was saying there. And then, so another very key concept that becomes integral to this assumption that there is something beyond material working in material is the concept of agency. What is it? So we're all familiar with it's like how with our thinking we actually create neural structures. If our thinking is like created by this wobbly, so like jelly-like chemical electrical reaction, what is it that's actually that we require an agent that is actually like recreating that structure, and there's something that's active. And a materialist will I don't know how a materialist like gets around this problem, that's like with thinking, which is an emergent property, it completely restructures its own the organ that creates itself. Do you sense like the contradiction in that? I'm not sure whether I've been clear enough.
No, I don't think there's much of a contradiction in that. I mean,
so how would that be explicable without some agency beyond the material body in your framework?
Okay, so I mean, so when I draw the pictures of the life cone jumping off of the matter cone, okay, what I'm drawing there is the emergence of an information processing system, okay, that is pieced together, all right, and ultimately then it has a membrane that then is detecting forms and is operating off of those forms that it detects.
Okay.
And then as it detects forms, it has a capacity to act on those forms, okay, and then build increasingly complicated, say, epistemic, sort of knowing that remembers those forms and then adjusts those forms. And as it engages, it evolves a model of the agent world relation. And those concepts, concepts change and are causal in relation. So that's the informational patterning in the structure that has causal consequence, and it has evolving causal consequence, and it's still instantiated and embedded in the structure. In other words, I don't need to add Elan Vital, or I don't need to add any other stuff, but I do need to add the property of an emergent information processing system that is now cyclically engaged and evolving.
Why?
Exactly. So you're building agency, something that's coming from beyond sort of like what is currently there in dead matter is creating something which is beyond that. Yeah. That's agency also. So that's at the plant
I don't have a problem
level.
with agency. Agency emerges at the life level. I mean, certainly much greater levels of agency are present in living entities than there are in inanimate entities.
Emerges as a product of
complexity
chance,
building,
or emerges because it's like there's something else that's sort of like mixing with that matter, or a third.
I mean, there's a complexity building feedback loop that is channeling, that gives rise to the growth of this process. So it grows,
okay,
and and then whether or not it's growing because of other, descriptively it's growing. And I think we have a pretty good causal explanatory weak frame. I mean, there's a lot we don't know. I mean, not every line is, but you get an overview and an outline, and you say, yeah, no, you can fill in the blanks there of the steps.
Do you want to talk about etheric there, Jeff?
No, I don't, because I don't think it's for me, it's just not the way to go from here. I think we're really, really drilling down to the thing, the matter of the thing, if you will. I hear what you're saying, and I think we agree with this reciprocity of relationship between complex in a complex dynamical system where there's. I love that you brought in the membrane because something has to have a sort of duality, right? In order to have a reciprocal relationship. And I guess I'm moved to ask the question: are you a one world or a dualist? Because you asked that, I said both, and I was serious. So maybe we can unpack that, because I think I sense that we can come closer with this.
Good, yeah. So at the substantial base of existence, I'm one worlder. I'm a one worlder in the sense that basically I see sort of this energy information implicate order being the fundamental substance. And then there's a massive amounts of differentiation in different phases. And these differentiation have causal consequences. So I believe that cause and causal consequences emerge. And I think Eric Hole, I've just did some essays on some of his work and being very clear and had the exact same basic conception. Why are things, and John and I talk about, there's an ontologically real level at higher orders. And by ontologically, I mean, yes, we have an epistemological way of framing that, but then we could see atoms are causing, Sean Carroll, who's more of a reductionist than I am, or emphasizes that, I don't know if you know him, but he's pretty famous. But he's like, cats are real, meaning cats live in a particular level of reality and have causal consequence. I believe that there's been an emerging structure of causal consequence, meaning that at different levels, those are real causes. They're good reasons to argue you can't reduce them. And these higher order macroscopic forms cause and have cause, and they grow stacking. You mentioned Piaget at a cognitive inside level. There's recursive layers on recursive layers on recursive layers. And the tree of knowledge says that actually happens at the matter level coming off of energy, and then it happens at the life level, and then the mind level, and then the culture level.
So energy is your agency, is the originating agency. The energy creates matter.
Substance.
There's nothing before energy, though. That's the ground.
Well, that's right. That's where my observable universe. That's where my observable universe, and then I get into the agnostic void. Exactly.
I see. And then what is energy?
Well, that's a very good question and a complicated question in relation. But fundamentally, the way at a substance level, I do follow the basic logic of the Big Bang, where essentially you're pulling back and you're vacuuming out differentiation. Okay, you vacuum out space, you vacuum out time, and you vacuum out the four fundamental forces, and they collapse onto a singular superforce. Now, whatever you want to call that singular superforce, But I do find the argument compelling that you get a emergence of an electromagnetic, gravitational, strong, weak nuclear force differentiation.
Isn't it interesting? That's a lovely description. You have an amazing ability to synthesize and systematize concepts. I just love it. It's available for everybody too. It's like I get what you're saying.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so I don't want to question that, except to ponder something, perhaps.
Okay.
Why does it come out as epistemology? You know what I mean? Why does it come out with the membrane, the reciprocal relationship, the recursive
Totally.
knowing relationship, and why also? I will ask this. This is perhaps in the Benita Roy flavor. Why is there a mediating self between these two realities? Say the ground, like the physical ground of existence, and the energic design principles that are creating something in this self that Bonnie did with that mind-blowing, just very simple center, the center that is everywhere and nowhere, right? Why does that become the gesture? Why does that become the sort of language that is written into the universe? And I would suggest that we have the answer to that, but it's not an answer that I can easily explain, but it's something I can do. And I do it when I'm in right now. It's happening right now in a way that you were describing. It's beautiful, the cellular, and I think this also challenges cell theory as biology, particularly. There's 4 or 5 of them: the bilipid membrane theory and the sodium potassium pump. There's so many problems with that because it isolates the cell in a non-unified, coherent structure where there's a linear cause and effect. And I guess in this, since I mentioned linear cause and effect, what I hear in your big history narrative is a linear process, and I'm not sure that I don't know what to do with that, because it presumes a notion of time, that time moves in a direction, and that there's a directionality to this, as opposed to a simultaneity, perhaps, that is also at least plausible, but certainly can't just be left behind based on our own common understanding of things as uncommon understanding, unfortunately. What's taught in schools is hopelessly outdated, 50 years old at least, but in any case, that how do you reconcile the time-space continuum, right? If this happened at this time, and then we have a linear evolutionary process, right? Is the future something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, okay. When you say linear, I'm certainly not. I'm definitely not drawing A to B to C to D to E in an inevitable linear clear path. Clearly, I'm not. That's not my conception. There is a linearity or a directionality to time in general. I mean, the past, present, future kind of dynamic would be happy to. Obviously, time is one of the most metaphysically complex concepts around. Like I said, I am the global. I do perceive what's called a global time perspective on the universe. The global time perspective on the universe is what I said in relationship to there is an emergent period of time. And my ontology, I've been very clear about this. The overarching ontology that my epistemology grips and maps does correspond to the basic outline of what is now consensual. And I would say it remains consensual, although aspects of the Big Bang are certainly the age of various very early universes, etc. I mean, very early galaxies raise some interesting questions. I still see a massive amount of evidence. There's a reason that there was a huge amount of consensus that was achieved. It's a very, very compelling narrative, in my view, that you roll the time back and everything gets sucked and collapsed. I haven't seen anything. I've read a lot of competing narratives, none of which have anywhere near, in my estimation, the evidence for them relative to the evidence against in that regard. So my ontology is a big beginning to the present across a time by complexification. My epistemology gives rise to that ontology, I will say. So, and then the global time is sequential in the sense of one time A, time B, time C, in that regard at a global time level. Now, block universe, time quantum, there are a lot of different areas to talk about in the nature of time. And then phenomenological time, that's a wonderfully rich and fascinating concept. But I would say that there is a global time angle that affords that kind of sequentiality. And our particular universe, historical, has been a trail of complexification up the staircase that Howard Bloom identifies, and virtually all big history narratives, take. And I'm certainly part of that basic big history narrative.
I'm going to have a go at answering your question about one world or two worlders.
Okay.
So building on this, we were talking earlier about entropy and it's like the opposite of what is actually going on in the universe, because I think that also leads Jeff and I to sort of the position that we are. So there's agency beyond the material. So to build the idea a little bit, if you look at, I'm going to go back to Phaedo and how Socrates sort of like using logos rather than mythos tries to prove the immortality of the soul. I'm not saying that's not my point here. I will come back to entropy. So he talks about this theory of opposites, very similar to Jungian psychology, this idea that it's like in all becoming, you have sort of like polar opposites going on. It's like without day, you can't have night, and without shortness, you can't have length. Without sleep, you can't have wakiness. It's like the fundamental nature of reality is opposites.
Okay.
And so when we have entropy as sort of like the underlying sort of like one side of the spectrum of the universe, absolutely, that's definitely part of it. The other side of the spectrum is sort of like that active force that is not there within material. It is that which is creating order out of the entropy. And we can't, we can't have structure being created by entropic forces. There has to be a different form of agency going on there. Both at the plant level, we give that the label etheric forces. So as an anthroposophist, we cannot be satisfied with saying, oh, it's just it's like these random permutations of chemicals and something. Ka-ching, you've got life. No, we've got something beyond matter going on there. Okay. And then at the animal level, we would use like a term like astral forces, which are that which give rise to consciousness, which is like present in the animal kingdom. And then finally, it's like at the human being level, you have the I. It's like the same I which becomes the Christ in Jung. The way he presents it in the Red Book. And that is the agency which actually gives us this self-reflective capacity that you were talking about earlier. So with that it's using that framework that we're working out of, that there has to be an opposite going on there that is not there in the material. And so are we one worldists? Yeah, we're all looking at one world, but it's sort of like this world of ever becoming is being created out of the polarities of the material and the spirit. And we as human beings are capable of looking in both directions to make sense of it. And I mean, I could expand on that, but that's an attempt to answer your good question about are we one worldists or two worldists?
I really do encourage you to read Bobby Azarian's The Romance of Reality, and because he's essentially just kind of describing an inherent learning force inside of the universe toward complexification. And I would hear that as that polarity, especially if you start talking about entropy in relationship to that, and he puts that pretty deep into the entire structure. And so that's, and I find myself, along those lines, that's I think for me, he overshoots its ubiquity, meaning that it's like, that's a good way of describing our complexification. But wait a minute, remember what percentage of the universe sits in hydrogen, helium, and empty space at the level of mass level. Okay, we're an unbelievably tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. And if the universe is throughout it already is trying to wake itself up, it hadn't done a very good job, except for us, as far as we know, kind of deal. Or at least that's
or perhaps it's far more awake and we're actually far lower down the
that would be
than...
well. Then sure, if you can make that case, then you
that is the case that we would make.
So so anyway, that's well, I mean, okay, like that I need to hear more about that. Like, there's a lot more of the matter that is awake in the universe, and that you have knowledge of that. Like, I mean, is our hydrogen atoms more awake, or the empty space awake? What's awake and where? If you would, or would you put it along those lines?
No. There are beings that are far more awake than us. Okay. So I would offer someone like Aurobindo as talking to that particular point when he develops the concept of the supermind, or Steiner when he's talking about his evolution of consciousness.
Beings as in like human beings, or beings that are
exactly beings.
Okay.
So in the accepted idea, as according to, let's call it traditional science, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's like the only beings that are beings are like ones that we can see. That is far too restrictive from our perspective. Okay. That no, these beings. A being doesn't have to show itself to us. Just like if magnetism exists all around us. Sure. We would never know it unless we had a Gauss meter, or unless we saw it having effect on us on an iron bar or something like that. So these invisible forces are not dependent on material for their existence. They can actually live independently of that. That's the type of position we're coming from.
I think I'd need, that opens up a number of questions.
I can imagine.
Sure we can get that.
But, no, not today. I know you've got to shoot, Greg. It's so a real pleasure having you here. It's being brave. I don't know whether you perceive it as being brave, but so like Jeff and I, we're quite vocal, and it's wonderful to have people coming and and challenging us, but also I hear a humility in yours, and it's like asking us questions. Well, how do you see this? Like that is, there's not this assumption that's I've got it all nailed down. And
I'll offer just a thought on that maybe as we wrap up. So here's where I am. Okay, I'm what I identify as an endo-naturalist. Okay, endo-naturalism basically means and unified theory of knowledge for the 21st century in a local spot. Okay, so I have an expansive view and make a lot of claims, but I want to be very clear. I see myself as narrowly constrained in a particular structure. Okay. Now that structure I see as having enormous implications for how we live in the world, because what I mean by that is the physical, reductive, scientific, natural structure emerged as a system of justification, okay, that had all sorts of consequence. I'm actually inside that system going, I actually understand why that's wrong. Okay, like it's broken, and it's like not
with the meaning crisis
within itself. Okay, so within itself and the assumptions that it makes about causality, about all that other stuff, it's actually got errors within itself that I actually I had before and can now see and can now fix. And when you fix them, then all of a sudden all sorts of things open up within itself. Okay, now so I'm agnostic on the outer layer of what I call exonaturalism. So if there's a whole outer layer of, say, we're in a spiritual universe inside of a material universe, you want to use that term or whatever, and I don't know about that layer. Maybe I'm agnostic. I'm open. I'd be interested. I'll bring a particular thing. I see the justification, the epistemology on the natural world. I see how it was broken, and I can fix it. That's what UTOK then does. And then it sits in relationship to dialogue with all sorts of different other perspectives and is open to them. So that's I will frame it that way.
That's beautifully said. So you saw something that needed to be done about the fucking morass that we're in, right? This complete chaotic fragmentation, as I would say, instead of an individualization, we've gone through a massive fragmentation, even in the last 10, 15 years.
Oh, it's only splittering more, and it's disastrous.
Yes. And we really believe what you're doing is important.
Absolutely.
And we also believe in what we're doing is important. And we see them as I don't know if we know enough about what you're because you've been so transparent as relates to your tree of knowledge that one can see, right? It's like you really make it transparent for us. And I love that. And it situates you in the world to have conversations with people who have a different epistemological framework out of which to work on these problems. And they are real problems. That. We are in a meta crisis. We are in danger of permanently losing the human being from history. And I say, and so that's a whole different conversation about what the self is, which I hope we can do this again and then get into this.
I would this one.
That's where we thought we were going to go, but we never got there.
we never got there. But anyway, it's been beautiful. No, I definitely appreciate it. And yes, I think we all need to be having conversations and exploring, as we're on this journey. And I'm, I'll just reiterate, I'm trying to fix a particular kind of thing within a particular kind of system, for sure.
Yeah.
And then we'll see.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
A real pleasure. Thanks.
Hey, I enjoyed it.
Really nice to meet you.
Thank you. And yes, I'd be happy to swing back and see where the conversation would continue. Okay.
Would love that. Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right.
Greg.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for what you guys are doing out there. I appreciate it.
Thank you as well.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.